What if the silence beneath our feet is not silence at all, but memory, waiting to be heard? 65 million years ago, something happened. Not just extinction, not just ash and fire, but a whisper encoded in the rock, buried deep beneath the dust of eons. It wasn't bones or broken tools. It was something far stranger, microscopic spheres of rare metals scattered in a global pattern. Not natural, not random, not human. A signature, like the echoes of a bomb we never dropped, like the fingerprint of a war we never fought. These metallic spheres match the very isotopic residue of our modern nuclear detonations, except they're older than humanity itself. They don't belong. Please like and subscribe, because this journey will change how you see our place in the universe. Prepare yourselves. We begin. Across continents embedded in sediment layers that predate the first cities, the first languages, even the first mammals, these anomalies have been uncovered. Not once, not in one location, but everywhere. They say, Earth keeps no secrets forever, but what if it does? What if the planet has been rewriting its own history, erasing not just the bones of the dead, but the machines, the monuments, the dreams of civilizations that once stood where we now walk? Because what these metals suggest is unthinkable. We are not the first. In 1980, a quiet revolution began, not in the stars, but in the soil. Geologist Walter Alvarez wasn't searching for ancient empires. He was looking at layers of clay in Italy. But what he found was iridium 30 times higher than normal. A rare metal, scarce on Earth, abundant in asteroids. A cosmic fingerprint. That iridium spike became the smoking gun that confirmed an asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs, the Great Reset, the end of an age. But something else happened that day, something more subtle. We realized the Earth could remember. In a layer no thicker than a sheet of paper, the planet had preserved the scars of a single cataclysmic day, a moment frozen in stone. If one asteroid could leave behind such a signature, then what of an industrial age? A nuclear war? 1,000 years of atmospheric change? What would be left of us 65 million years from now? Would we be dust? Or data? This is the paradox at the core of the Silurian Hypothesis, named not for the geologic period, but for a lizard-like species from Doctor Who. A metaphor, a myth, a warning. The Silurian Hypothesis doesn't claim there were dinosaurs with smartphones. It asks a more profound question. Could there have been a civilization before us? And would we even be able to tell? Geological time is not linear. It's brutal. The Earth forgives nothing and remembers everything, but only in the language of pressure and decay. A skyscraper becomes sand. A city becomes a chemical trace. A war becomes isotopes, drifting through layers of ice. If modern civilization ended tomorrow, what would survive? Not steel, not glass, not Wi-Fi, but carbon, radiation, microplastics, artificial isotopes, nuclear scars, the invisible ink of civilization. And if we can imagine our own footprint fossilized into future rock, why not others? Why not someone before? The Silurian Hypothesis says this. If another technological species arose millions of years ago, we wouldn't find their buildings or their books. We'd find their effects, their emissions, their waste, their manipulation of ecosystems and air, not their tools, but the consequences of using them. That's how the Earth records its history, not in words, but in climate, chemistry, and catastrophe. It's a haunting idea, because it means that we are not alone in our capacity to alter a planet. We're just the latest, and perhaps not the last. We measure civilization in years. The Earth measures in epochs. 10,000 years of human progress is nothing, a comma in a novel 4.5 billion pages long, a whisper in a hurricane, a flicker of light in a cave older than memory. If another civilization lasted as long as we have and was erased, their entire story would be a single page in a library of stone. And yet, some pages leave smudges. So we start here, not with pyramids, Not with Atlantis, but with anomalies, metal spheres in prehistoric strata, radioactive isotopes without origin, microscopic particles of synthetic materials embedded in ancient rock, carbon spikes identical to fossil fuel combustion, but 50 million years too early. Each one is a whisper. Each one is a contradiction. Each one asks the question we're afraid to answer. What if we're living in the aftermath of someone else's story? What if our civilization is a sequel, not a beginning? Welcome to the journey. In the chapters that follow, we'll explore ancient nuclear signatures, mass extinctions that don't add up, genetic anomalies buried in amber, machine-like crystal formations deep beneath the Earth, and satellite-like objects hiding in orbit. We'll ask, is extinction always natural? Is technology always visible? Can consciousness outlive biology? And most of all, what happens when civilizations die? Not with a bang, but with a fade into deep time. The evidence is buried. The questions are louder than the answers. But the silence is starting to speak. If the history of life is a book, then entire chapters are missing, not torn out, but never written with ink we recognize. The fossil record is supposed to be our timeline, a biological breadcrumb trail from primordial soup to cities of steel and thought. But when you flip through its pages, something is wrong. The narrative doesn't flow. There are no gradual arcs, no build-up, no connecting tissue between miracles. Instead, there are leaps sudden, impossible, and sharp as if life pressed fast forward or skipped a chapter entirely. We call these gaps, but that's a gentle word. It's like calling the Grand Canyon a dip in the road. These aren't just missing bones, they are missing stories. And in their absence, something ancient may be hiding. 540 million years ago, life changed forever. Before this, Earth's oceans were ghostly and quiet. Only soft, single-celled organisms drifted in the abyss, blind, silent, unarmored. Evolution crawled like molasses. Every change took millions of years. Then in geological terms, everything exploded. Shells, eyes, exoskeletons. Complexity that should have taken eons appeared almost overnight. We call it the Cambrian explosion. And to this day, we have no idea how it happened. One moment, microbial simplicity. The next, creatures with nervous systems, jaws, armor, vision. As if evolution received instructions, as if blueprints were delivered in secret. If this were a movie, we'd call it a montage. The part where the protagonist learns fast, too fast, and suddenly emerges transformed. But this isn't cinema, it's biology. It's supposed to follow rules, gradualism, mutation, selection. The Cambrian doesn't. What it offers instead is a riddle wrapped in trilobites and soft-bodied enigmas. And it's not alone. The fossil record doesn't just skip, it flickers. Multiple times across Earth's deep past, species have appeared fully formed, as if assembled off-screen. Then they vanish, and something new rises, just as inexplicably. We call them radiations. We call them diversifications. But what if we're just naming the smoke, not the fire? What if these bursts of complexity aren't spontaneous evolutions, but resets? Or worse, interventions? Scientists try to explain the gaps. Preservation bias, they say. Soft tissues don't fossilize well. Ancient life lived in places unlikely to leave records. Entire epochs might have gone undocumented simply because the camera wasn't rolling. They are right to a point. Yes, fossils are rare. Yes, conditions matter. But the scale of these absences defies randomness. These gaps don't appear randomly. They cluster. They coincide with chemical shifts, with climate swings, with sudden atmospheric anomalies. The Great Oxygenation Event is one of them. 2 billion years ago, Earth's air changed violently. Oxygen levels skyrocketed. The very sky became poison for most life, while enabling others to flourish. We credit cyanobacteria, the little photosynthesizers that could. But the timing, the speed, the planetary precision, it's almost too perfect, like someone flipped a switch. What if evolution didn't leap, but was pushed? What if some gaps are not voids, but veils covering something deliberate, like software being rewritten, like a reset button hit, not by nature, but by a hand, an ancient one. The fossil record is not a smooth timeline. It's a tapestry of vanishing acts. Species come, thrive, disappear sometimes with no explanation. No asteroid, no volcano, no climate shift, just gone. And sometimes, something stranger, entire ecosystems vanish, only to be replaced by new ones that feel tailored, pre-adapted, as if they were waiting in the wings, rehearsed and ready. Here's a question we don't ask enough. What does intelligence look like when it leaves no tools behind? Not wheels, not wires, but genetic fingerprints, atmospheric edits, biological complexity that shouldn't exist yet. We keep looking for fire and metal for pyramids and pots, but perhaps ancient intelligence wasn't obsessed with building upwards. Perhaps it built inwards, into life itself. If you were an advanced civilization with mastery over biology, would you leave monuments? Or would you rewrite DNA? Would you build cities or ecosystems? The gaps in the fossil record are not just mysteries, they are signals. They say, something happened here, something began or ended too fast, something left, and something else took its place. And yet we cling to the narrative that we were first, that intelligence blooms only once. That time is a line, and we stand at its cutting edge. But what if time is a loop? What if civilizations rise, fall, and rise again, each one forgetting the last? The Earth is patient. It waits. It forgets. But it also remembers in layers if you know where to look. So we look into the rock, into the ice, into the genealogies of life, written not in ink, but in sequences. And what we see, or more precisely, what we don't see, tells a story more unnerving than any myth. That we are walking across the bones of past worlds, not just creatures but ideas, not just species but systems, technologies, societies, visions, all compressed into silence. And once you see the gaps for what they really are, not absences, but boundaries, you begin to feel it. The breath behind the curtain, the ghost in the genome, the question that won't leave you alone. What happened here, before us? What if the sky was not just shaped by life, but by intelligence? Air, we don't think about it. We breathe it, curse it in hurricanes, measure it in pollution levels, but we rarely wonder how it came to be the way it island. As if the atmosphere was always here, waiting for us, tailored to our lungs and our evolution. But it wasn't. Earth's atmosphere is not just a backdrop for life. It's a participant, a collaborator, a character with a changing voice. And at certain moments in deep time, it changed too fast and too precisely for comfort. Long before us, long before mammals, even long before animals, the sky changed. And when it did, the planet trembled. Oxygène, once à trace poison, surged. Life, once microscopic, exploded. And the world was never the same. They call it the Great Oxygenation Event. We call it suspiciously perfect timing. 2 billion years ago, something began to flood the skies with a molecule lethal to almost everything alive. Oxygen. It's easy to forget now, but for most of Earth's history, oxygen was rare, a reactive killer. Cells couldn't handle it. Life thrived without it. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, the atmosphere was rewritten. Cyanobacteria, tiny photosynthetic organisms, are blamed. They discovered photosynthesis. They made oxygen a byproduct. And over millions of years, they poisoned the world. That's the textbook story. But there's a problem, or rather, several. The surge was too steep, the shift too synchronized, the consequences too systemic. Oxygen didn't rise like a glitch. It poured in like a plan. Imagine an entire planet being edited, its chemistry transformed on a global scale, not by volcanoes or asteroids, but by intent, by coordination, by civilization. Because that's what it would take to terraform a world. To elevate oxygen from 1% to 20% isn't a passive process. It demands control of biosphere, carbon cycles, oceanic chemistry, and atmospheric stability. you'd need the power to reshape the entire climate engine of Earth. And that's exactly what the fossil and chemical records show. Sudden oxygen spikes, long stability, then another spike. It's as if someone was tuning the sky, experimenting, adjusting, perfecting. What if the great oxygenation event wasn't natural? What if it was an atmospheric intervention? A moment when a civilization unknown and unremembered decided to reset the board? The result? A breathable atmosphere. A world made ready for complex, mobile, intelligent life. Not in one swift gesture, but in deliberate stages, separated by time, tuned like a symphony. It may sound fantastical, but consider this. Humanity is already attempting it. Geoengineering proposals today suggest injecting aerosols into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight. We talk of carbon scrubbing, climate control, weather manipulation, and even restoring oxygen to ocean dead zones. We are barely a century into industrialization, and already we aim to sculpt the sky. Now imagine a species with millions of years of development. What would their atmosphere look like? Would it even resemble ours? Or would it resemble the one we inherited? There are strange things in the sky's history, moments that behave more like decisions than natural disasters. Rapid shifts in greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, and methane that rise and fall in perfect curves. Temperature changes that defy orbital mechanics and solar cycles. Chemical signatures that appear engineered, optimized, and then reversed. As if someone said, too much heat, pull it back. Too much carbon scrubbing. Too unstable, freeze the growth. Just enough now, hold. This is not random. It is intentionality written in chemistry. Some scientists say it's all feedback loops. Earth self-regulates. Maybe. But feedback loops don't leave isotopic fingerprints that mirror modern industry. They don't create synthetic gas ratios that resemble fluorinated compounds, known only to human chemistry. And yet, such compounds have been found, not once, not twice, but repeatedly, in ice cores, in ancient air bubbles, in sediment layers from periods that predate humanity by millions of years. They don't fit, they don't degrade, and they don't belong unless they were left behind by someone else. Here's the deepest paradox. The sky that gives us life may be a construct, an artifact of planetary scale design. What if oxygen wasn't just a byproduct of algae? What if it was a target? What if the planet didn't evolve life by accident, but by encouragement? And here's the question that really unsettles. Did someone engineer the atmosphere not just to support life, but to support a return? Their return? Or ours? Think of the atmosphere as software, a code that runs everything. Climate, weather, photosynthesis, respiration. If that software was written, then we are living inside a system we didn't build, breathing the air someone else programmed. And if that's true, we're not just visitors. We're successors, heirs to a forgotten legacy not of pyramids and monuments, but of skies calibrated for life. They say we look up and wonder if we're alone, but perhaps the answer isn't in the stars. Perhaps it's in the air between us, in the ratios of nitrogen and oxygen, in the balance of greenhouse gases, in the delicate chemistry that keeps the oceans alive and the forests green, a balance too precise, too perfect, too convenient. We didn't inherit a wilderness. We inherited a garden, not Eden, but its sequel. And maybe, just maybe, we weren't the first to tend it. The earth does not forget it, just hides what we are not yet ready to see. Beneath the forests and oceans, under mountains older than thought, lies a record not of words or images, but of elements, isotopes, alloys, ratios, a memory made of matter, etched in pressure, decay, and time. It's not romantic, it's not poetic, it's cold, precise, unyielding, and yet, in its silence, it tells a story more haunting than any myth, because the Earth remembers things that shouldn't be here. Things like synthetic polymers, in sediment 10 million years too old. Things like titanium microspheres, distributed globally, like the exhaust of a vanished industry. Things like plutonium isotopes, embedded in rock strata long before humans discovered how to split the atom. It's as if someone or something built, burned, and vanished, and left the ashes behind. In Colorado's ancient formations, geologists found something odd. Microscopic beads perfectly spherical, alloyed with rare earth metals, and fused at temperatures only achievable through advanced industrial processes. They're not scattered randomly. They form layers, separated by geological time, as if multiple waves of activity once pulsed through the crust. One scientist likened it to the residue of high-temperature furnaces, the kind used in modern aerospace or nuclear plants. Another simply called them impossible. But there they are, buried, waiting, and they are not alone. In deep ocean cores, far from any human influence, lie synthetic compounds we cannot explain. Some mimic modern plastics. Some outperform them, more durable, more resistant, more refined than anything our labs produce. They're ancient, they're global, and they shouldn't exist. The molecular patterns suggest engineering, not chance, and the fact that they appear, disappear, and then reappear again millions of years later implies not a freak occurrence, but a pattern, a cycle. Civilizations rising, falling, and leaving behind their chemical ghosts. Then there's the carbon. You know it. We all do. We burn oil, we burn coal, and in doing so, we alter the carbon signature of the planet. Modern atmospheric carbon carries a distinct isotopic fingerprint, one that tells future scientists humans were here, and they burned their past to fuel their present. But here's the twist. That same fingerprint, that same signature shows up at the Permian-Triassic boundary, 252 million years ago. Known as the Great Dying, this extinction erased 96% of marine life, 70% of land species. Entire ecosystems blinked out. And the rocks left behind? They carry the same carbon profile, as if all fossil fuels had been burned at once. Volcanoes? Maybe. Methane release? Possibly. But the scale, the speed, and the precision of the shift, it mirrors us. It's like looking in a mirror and seeing someone else blink first. Let's talk radiation. When humans tested nuclear weapons in the 20th century, we changed the Earth forever. We seeded the world with isotopes that don't occur naturally. Cesium-137, iodine-129, plutonium-244. These elements are our signature, our calling card, and they will last millions of years. Now imagine finding those exact isotopes in strata from 50 million years ago, in Kazakhstan, in South America, in oceanic trenches untouched by modern industry. The ratios match what we see from controlled nuclear detonations, not natural reactors, like those rare Oklo formations in Africa. Number. These are weapons, grade patterns, deliberate, concentrated, coordinated. Someone long before us knew how to split the atom, and they did it more than once. Every blast, every factory, every machine leaves behind chemical fingerprints, not just in the air, not just in the water, but in stone, the only witness that never blinks. The deeper scientists dig, the more they find. Titanium-rich spheres, consistent with atmospheric dispersal, artificial isotopes embedded in ice 700,000 years old, unnatural metallic inclusions fused into mineral lattices. We explain them away: anomalies, contamination, mislabeling, but the pattern is too systematic. It's not anomalies, it's evidence. It's just that we're not used to looking at history through chemistry. We want bones, we want ruins, we want something we can touch. But the universe doesn't care what we want. It leaves behind what it can, and what survives longest is not monuments but molecules. Let's reframe the question. What if we are not the beginning? What if we are a midpoint? What if Earth is not a cradle of life, but a relay station, where each civilization hands the baton to the next? Not willingly, but inevitably. And what they leave behind is not language, but pollution. Not scriptures, but spheres. Not myths, but modified matter. It's a horrifying thought that all our achievements, the internet, the space probes, the skyscrapers, will one day be reduced to residue. Isotopic quirks, synthetic fragments, glassy beads in ash. We are not special in the eyes of deep time, unless we choose to be, because if someone came before, if they burned, built, broke, and vanished, then so can we, and the only evidence of their existence is now in our hands. Their final message may not be carved in stone. It is the stone, and if we learn to read it, we may finally understand not just how they lived, but why they died. We dream of legacies carved in marble, but what survives us is garbage. If our civilization were to vanish tomorrow, the last thing to fade would not be our monuments, or our monuments to thought, not our books, nor our skyscrapers, nor even the bones of our bodies. It would be plastic, billions of tons of it floating in oceans, buried in landfills, scattered like breadcrumbs across the face of a planet we briefly ruled. In every corner of the Earth, from Arctic ice sheets to the darkest ocean trenches, microscopic plastic particles are now embedded into the planet's memory. We did not mean to do this, but we did, and it will outlive us. Plastic is our accidental immortality. It resists sunlight. It resists pressure. It laughs in the face of time. Drop a plastic spoon in the desert, and it may outlast the pyramids. Bury a plastic bottle beneath a city, and 1,000,000 years from now, a geologist might brush it free, intact, and wonder, not who we were, but what we were, because nothing in the natural world behaves like plastic, except now we know it's not just our plastic. Something very similar has been found in layers millions of years too old, in places untouched by human history, on ocean floors buried under kilometers of sediment, in strata dated long before primates emerged. Synthetic polymers, engineered molecules, time capsules we didn't build, but someone did. The first discoveries were dismissed as contamination, a stray lab glove, a speck of modern debris. But then they found more, in samples pulled from sediment cores beneath the Pacific, the Atlantic, even ancient rock beds in Central Asia. Not one anomaly, but dozens, then hundreds, and the materials weren't just plastic-like. They were better, more durable, more resistant, chemically stable in ways our own polymers can only dream of. Some displayed cross-linked molecular chains designed to resist even the most aggressive environmental breakdown. Others contained additive compounds for radiation shielding, the kind you'd need in space or at high-altitude atmospheric stations. These weren't just waste, they were technology. Then came the layering. In the sediment record, these polymer fragments didn't appear gradually. They showed up suddenly in distinct global layers. Just like our own plastic horizon, which future geologists will see as a clear line in the rock marking the Anthropocene. But these layers? They were from 10 million, 20 million, some even 50 million years ago. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they stopped. No trace in the next layer. No gradual decline. Just silence. It's as if a plastic-based civilization flashed into being, spread across the planet, then collapsed, leaving only a synthetic scar. And it didn't happen once. The patterns suggest it happened multiple times. Think of it like this. Plastic doesn't decay. It accumulates. If you were looking for signs of intelligent life that had long since vanished, you wouldn't look for statues. You'd look for residue. You'd search for molecules that nature doesn't make, and you'd find them embedded in the crust, carried in glacial ice, fossilized in the silt of ancient rivers. Not just as debris, but as evidence. Some of these ancient polymers are even more disturbing. Under electron microscopes, they show nanostructures repeating lattice formations that appear to be designed for specific purposes. Some carry traces of molecular data encoding, like biological QR codes. Not storage in the way we understand it, but something more akin to biological computation. In other words, these aren't just materials. They're machines. Tiny, silent, undead, and they were buried here long before us. Then came the ice. In Antarctica, deep drilling projects pulled up cores that hadn't seen sunlight in 1,000,000 years. And trapped in the frozen breath of a forgotten Earth were polymer particles that matched nothing in our industrial catalogues. No factories could have made them. No accidental process could have synthesized them. Their molecular arrangement was too efficient, too elegant, too purposeful, and yet there they were, suspended in the past, waiting. So what does it mean? Maybe it's a fluke, a natural process we don't understand, some weird crystallization of organic compounds under pressure, but that doesn't explain the patterns, the distributions, the engineering embedded in the molecules. It doesn't explain why the deeper we dig, the more intentional it all feels. Ask yourself, if we were to disappear, what would we leave behind? Microscopic fibers in glaciers, isotopes in coral, polymers in ocean silt. Now flip that question. What if someone already did? What if our plastic is not the first footprint, but the latest echo repeating an ancient cycle? The deepest plastic layers show something else, signs of improvement, as if each pulse of polymer civilization got better, stronger, more refined, until for reasons we don't know they stopped. Maybe they moved on, maybe they collapsed, maybe, just maybe, they left these plastic time capsules for us as markers, as warnings, or as invitations. We once believed the fossil record would tell us the story of life. Now we know. The chemical record tells us the story of civilization, not through fossils, but through fragments, not through bones, but through trash. Civilization, it turns out, doesn't write its name in stone. It leaves waste. And if that waste is synthetic enough, durable enough, clever enough, it becomes archaeology. So when we hold a plastic bottle, we hold a paradox. It is pollution, it is permanence, it is proof. Proof that we were here, proof that we could change a planet, proof that something can outlast time, and now, maybe, proof that we weren't the first. Some ghosts are not made of flesh or bone, some glow in the dark. Nuclear energy was supposed to be our crowning achievement, the final mastery of nature, a source of infinite power or absolute destruction. We believed we were the first to split the atom. We believed we had unlocked forces no civilization before us had ever dared to touch. We believed the Earth had never seen such fire, but the Earth keeps secrets better than we do, and it is whispering now, in isotopes and half-lives, telling a different story, a story of detonations without witnesses, of reactors with no builders, of radiation with no reason to exist. Let's start with the impossible. In 1972, in a uranium mine in Oklo, Gabon, deep in equatorial Africa, scientists found something that defied logic. A natural nuclear reactor, not a metaphor, not an analogy, an actual fission reactor, self-sustaining, self-regulating, operating 2 billion years ago. For years, it was hailed as a miracle of natural chemistry. The right conditions, the right minerals, the right geometry, a 1 in a trillion alignment of chance. But some scientists looked closer, and what they found didn't add up. The neutron absorption patterns were too efficient. The containment structures made of mineral seams and silicate layers behaved like purpose-built shielding, and the reactor didn't burn out instantly. It cycled, on and off, like it was being controlled. By what? Or by who? Then came the isotopes. In deep strata, far from the influence of any modern nuclear testing, geologists found cesium-137, iodine-129, and plutonium-244. These are not natural elements. They don't occur on Earth in usable quantities. They are man-made, or at least civilization-made. They are signatures, and the pattern was familiar: elevated levels of fallout isotopes, spikes in radioactive decay products, localized hot zones with symmetrical dispersal, rings the kind you'd expect from an aerial detonation. These weren't leaks. They weren't background noise. They were blasts, and they occurred millions of years before the dawn of Homo sapiens. One such zone, found in the Ural Mountains, showed a fusion of sand into trinitite, the glassy residue left when nuclear weapons are detonated in desert environments. Trinitite is our signature, a scar we left in New Mexico, but it now appears in paleostrata, under forests, beneath lakes. We didn't put it there, so who did? The anomalies grew stranger. In Rajasthan, India, An ancient city's ruins revealed unusual radiation levels in its stonework. Some bricks appeared to have been fused from the inside out, as if exposed to a searing burst of energy, not flame, but something far more intense. Local legends speak of a weapon wielded by the gods, which lit up the skies brighter than 1,000 suns and turned men to ash. For centuries, this was considered myth, but now we know that's exactly how a nuclear detonation appears. The timelines don't match, the tools don't exist, the archaeology is inconsistent, and yet the isotopes remain, because radiation doesn't leave. Here's what makes it undeniable. Every civilization leaves a nuclear fingerprint. It's not just the explosion, it's the isotopic decay trail, the ratio of uranium-235 to uranium-238, the appearance of daughter products like strontium-90 and americium-241. It's like a DNA strand unique to the process that created it. And when we test the soil, the ice, the ancient clay, we're finding fingerprints that don't belong to us. They're too old, too widespread, too uniform, and too deliberate. Even the moon isn't free from suspicion. Some lunar samples brought back by Apollo missions show elevated traces of uranium and neptunium in formations that suggest radiation bombardment, not from the sun, but from planetary-based events. Was the moon a witness? Or a target? Was it scarred by something Earth unleashed long before we built rockets? Or did it share in a planetary event that consumed an older civilization, one erased not by nature, but by its own fire? Here's the terrifying possibility. We are not living in the first atomic age. We are merely repeating one, and the last one ended not in decay, not in collapse, but in extinction. Civilization, after all, is a fragile thing, and when you master fire at the atomic level, you also master your own annihilation. So what can we learn from these buried signatures? We learn that the Earth forgets slowly, that even the most precise weapons leave traces, that no war is truly secret, and that the planet remembers, not through history books, but through radiation. The nuclear enigma is not just a scientific mystery, it's a mirror, one that shows us what happens when intelligence meets hubris, when discovery meets aggression, when power meets fear. We gaze into this ancient radioactive past and see ourselves staring back, because the moment you hold the atom's heart in your hands, you hold the power to unmake the world, and someone long before us already did. So now we ask the ultimate question: if they burned themselves away, what makes us think we won't? Because we're already walking the same path. The mushroom cloud may not be ancient history. It may be a ritual repeated by every intelligent species that rises from the mud. And if that's true, then we must choose. Do we become the next ghost, or the first to break the cycle? The dead do not always leave bones. Sometimes they leave only questions. The story of life on Earth is told in layers. Strata of stone, lines of extinction, arcs of evolution that stretch across eons. Each layer of sediment is a sentence in the planet's autobiography, and the fossil record, its ancient memory. But what happens when the pages are torn out? When whole chapters vanish? When transitions appear without causes and disappearances lack fingerprints? What happens when the most profound clue isn't what's there, but what isn't? Let's go back 252 million years to the Permian-Triassic extinction event. Over 90% of marine species, 70% of land vertebrates, gone. Geologists call it the Great Dying, but they don't know why. There is no singular asteroid impact like with the dinosaurs, nor definitive volcanic explanation. Just a sudden, planet-wide collapse, an erasure, life rebooted, not slowly, but abruptly. New species rose. Old lineages vanished without descendants, and in the fossil record, the boundary is sharp, not eroded, almost like a system reset. Then again, 66 million years ago, the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, we blame the Chicxulub asteroid. But what if the impact was only a trigger, not a cause? Because in the years before that asteroid, biodiversity was already plummeting. Coral reefs were collapsing, pollination patterns were breaking, mammals began to spread faster than evolution would suggest. Something was shifting, something unrecorded. Someone might have already been intervening or perishing. Here's the hypothesis few dare whisper. What if these extinction events weren't just natural disasters, but the consequence of civilizations? What if someone long before us pushed the biosphere too far, used technology that rewrote the atmosphere, waged wars that blackened the skies? Not all weapons are bombs. Some are chemistry, some are biology. And when they're used, life doesn't just die. It vanishes, without bones, without monuments, without names. There are other absences. Species that should exist but don't. Mammalian lineages that appear suddenly, with no transitional fossils. Birds with modern flight adaptations that predate their evolutionary timeline. Floral DNA that diverges from all known ancestors as if artificially inserted. Paleontologists call these ghost lineages. But maybe they're not ghosts. Maybe they're inheritances from civilizations lost, but not forgotten. Maybe we are not the first to engineer life. There is silence in the fossil record, and that silence is deafening. In some regions, entire epochs are missing. Millions of years. No sedimentation, no organic residue, no decay. Just blankness, like someone erased the tape. We've always assumed erosion, but what if it was cleansing? What if something or someone scrubbed the record clean to hide, to forget, or to protect us? Let's talk about OPART's out-of-place artifacts. Fossilized metal spheres with perfect symmetry found in Precambrian rock, tracks and tool-like impressions etched in stone millions of years too early. Carbon traces of combustion in layers older than any human fire. Most are dismissed, written off as hoaxes, misidentification, geological quirks. But the pattern persists. Technology in the wrong time, footprints without feet, ashes without flame, evidence without explanation. Even evolution carries its own absences. Why did human brain size triple in just 2 million years, a blink in evolutionary terms? Why do so many myths from every culture speak of a great forgetting? A fall, a flood, a war in the heavens, stories that feel more like memories than metaphors. What if the story of humanity is not a rise from savagery, but a return? What if we are the survivors of survivors? The third draft of a civilization that keeps trying to remember? Here's the unsettling truth. If a civilization doesn't last long, if it burns fast and bright, it leaves nothing in the fossil record, just a thin layer of isotopes, a few rearranged molecules, a whisper in the rock. In 10 million years, we might be invisible. All our cities reduced to minerals, all our records eaten by time. We may not even become fossils. We may become questions. Absence is not the opposite of presence. It is its own kind of presence, the kind that demands explanation. So, when we see gaps in the fossil record, when we find no fossils, where there should be billions, when ecosystems reset overnight with no warning, maybe we're not looking at natural mystery. Maybe we're looking at civilizational trauma, a scar not from volcanoes or meteors, but from ourselves, or from those who came before. Here's the final irony. If we vanish today, future scientists might not find the Statue of Liberty, or the iPhone, or the space shuttle, but they would find nothing, and that nothing would tell them everything. Because sometimes, absence is the loudest scream. If you wanted to leave behind a message that would last 1 billion years, you wouldn't carve it in stone, you'd write it in life. The double helix is the most elegant spiral in nature. 2 threads dancing around each other, base by base, silently composing everything we are. Breath, blood, thought, pain, memory, desire. We call it DNA, but maybe we should call it a library, because hidden inside every cell is not just a blueprint for building bodies, but a record, a code, a silent language written in ATCG. And some believe this code may contain footprints, not just of biology, but of civilization. Think of it. Every bit of human progress we've made from fire to fusion is the result of a brain born from genes that evolved far too quickly. In evolutionary terms, The neocortex, the seat of consciousness, exploded onto the scene like a supernova. No slow climb, just a leap. How? Random mutation doesn't move that fast. Natural selection isn't that precise. Unless something intervened, unless our DNA was modified, not by gods, not by aliens, but by those who came before us right here on Earth. A civilization that understood genetic engineering, not as science fiction, but as survival. If your species was facing extinction, war, famine, a planetary catastrophe, how would you pass on your knowledge? Stone tablets erode, satellites fail, books burn, but DNA endures. It copies itself, it replicates across generations, it evolves, but never forgets. So what if they didn't build monuments? What if they built us? There are clues, segments of DNA called introns, long stretches of non-coding code, often dismissed as junk. But what if they're not junk? What if they're encrypted data? Compressed messages waiting for a mind advanced enough or evolved enough to decode them? Like biological time capsules, waiting. Some scientists have even proposed the theory of genomic SETI, the idea that messages could be encoded within genomes by intelligent beings. The assumption is extraterrestrial life. But what if the authors were terrestrial? Just ancient. Then there are the Hox genes. These are the master switches genes that control body plans. Turn one on, you get a limb. Turn another off, you lose a tail. These are not simple instructions, they're architectural schematics, and they appear early and unchanged like lines of master code copied into every species. No learning curve, no messy trial and error, as if someone uploaded the whole design suite into life's operating system. Even our own cognitive leap remains suspicious. Why do humans alone possess the FOXP2 gene variation linked to language? Why did our ancestors develop music, mathematics, and metaphor in an evolutionary blink? Why do dreams, morality, and the concept of time emerge from circuits that had no Darwinian need for them? The mind seems overbuilt, as if prepared not just to survive, but to remember, not just to eat or breed, but to reach back and forward. In the deepest parts of the genome, researchers have found orphan genes. These are gene sequences with no evolutionary relatives, no ancestral lineage, no slow mutation history. They just appear, fully functional, like dropped paragraphs in a manuscript. The question is no longer, where did they evolve from? The question is, who wrote them? Let's go even deeper. Mitochondrial DNA passed down through mothers is like a stable hard drive. If you were trying to send a message across time, you'd use mitochondrial DNA, and there are anomalies, strange repetitions, palindromic sequences, geometrically symmetrical patterns that serve no biological function. Unless the function isn't biological, unless it's semantic, unless it's a message, not for the body, but for the mind. Here's the idea that bends the brain. What if humanity isn't just an accident of evolution, but a recovery protocol? A reboot, the product of an ancient intelligence embedding its essence, its knowledge, its soul not in machines but in us. We were not seeded as crops, we were seeded as archives. Some ancient myths speak of this directly. The Zulu tell of sky people who planted consciousness in the bloodline. The Dogon of Mali speak of star DNA, encoded in the Nomo primordial beings from long ago. Even the Hebrew Genesis whispers of the breath of God entering dust to create man. Maybe these aren't metaphors. Maybe they're genetic memories. So what do we do with this? We look within. Literally, every genome we sequence might be part of a cosmic jigsaw. Every mutation, a fragment of a civilization speaking through molecules. And perhaps the real discovery of science isn't out there. It's inside us, not in telescopes, but in code. Imagine decoding the genome not for diseases, but for instructions, not for ancestry, but for destiny. What might we find? The blueprint for technologies we've never imagined? Maps of the stars as they were millions of years ago? Equations that describe consciousness itself? Or a warning? Do not repeat our mistakes. Here's the final revelation. We are not just descendants. We may be messages, walking records, a species built not just to survive, but to remember what the Earth itself has tried to forget. The genome is not just a gift, it's a key. The question is, will we learn to read it before it's too late? What if the past isn't lost, just buried in plain sight, mistaken for stone, ignored by history, and mislabeled by science? Sometimes, the Earth whispers secrets, not in words, but in shapes that don't belong, in patterns that defy erosion, in materials that should not exist, and yet do. These are the anomalies, the misfits, the objects that don't fit into the story we've written, so we pretend they aren't there. But what if they are clues? Evidence not of visitors from other worlds, but technicians, engineers, builders right here on Earth. A civilization swallowed by time, but not completely digested. And every so often, the Earth spits out a piece. Let's begin with the coal. Deep in seams dated to 300 million years ago, the Carboniferous era, long before dinosaurs, miners have reported a metallic hammer encased in rock, a screw-like object embedded in coal, a perfectly formed sphere with parallel grooves etched around its circumference. Science says anomalies, pareidolia, geological coincidence. But metallurgy tests revealed the hammer's head was made of iron, alloyed with chlorine and sulfur, an unnatural combination, not replicable without advanced smelting. The grooves on the spheres, perfectly spaced like machined threads. Coal takes millions of years to form. So how did man-made objects end up inside them? Unless they're not man-made, but civilization-made, just not ours. Then there's the London artifact, a small iron hammer found in Texas, fused into a Cretaceous rock formation, age to 100 million years. Or the Nampa figurine, a tiny human-shaped sculpture pulled from a 300-foot borehole in Idaho, embedded in Miocene deposits. Or the Coso artifact, an alleged spark plug-like object inside a geode found in California, dismissed as hoaxes, laughed out of academia, buried again, this time under ridicule. Not sediment, but science has a blind spot. It sees only what it's trained to expect, and when it stumbles on the impossible, it calls it a mistake. Let's go bigger. In South Africa, thousands of stone structures known as Adam's calendar align with solstices and cardinal directions. They're old, possibly older than Stonehenge, but there's no cultural context, no bones, no tools, just geometry, as if the builders vanished, leaving only coordinates behind. Or the Yonaguni Monument, off the coast of Japan, underwater megaliths that resemble stairs, platforms, and carvings. Mainstream geologists say erosion, but marine archaeologists suggest architecture. Who carved it? Why is it under the sea? And most importantly, how old is it really? Because if it predates the last ice age, it wasn't made by us. Even microscopic anomalies defy explanation. In Russia's Ural Mountains, scientists discovered tiny coil-shaped structures, some smaller than a millimeter, made of tungsten and molybdenum, buried in layers dated 100,000 years ago. Too small for ancient tools, too advanced for tribal metallurgy, too specific in shape to be natural. They look like electronic components. So what are they doing in the Pleistocene? Here's the cosmic gut punch. We assume technology leaves traces like concrete, steel, or radiation. But what if earlier civilizations used materials we don't recognize? What if their computers weren't made of silicon? What if their engines weren't made of metal? What if they used biotech? Crystal resonance? Materials that decay cleanly into nature? A million years later, nothing would remain. Nothing except maybe a few wrong things in the wrong place. Exactly the kind of things we've already found. Exactly the kind of things we keep mislabeling. And then there's geometry. From Peru's Nazca lines to Bolivia's Puma Punku, the Earth bears shapes visible only from the sky. Perfectly straight lines across miles of terrain. Massive stones cut with laser-like precision. Joints so tight a razor can't slip through. Tool? Lost. Blueprints? Gone. Culture? Erased. But the designs remain, not primitive. Intentional. Industrial. Mathematical. Some skeptics argue these aren't artifacts. They're coincidence. They're weathering. They're natural formations misinterpreted by imaginative minds. And maybe they are. But when enough anomalies stack up, when they repeat across continents and epochs, you stop calling it coincidence. You start calling it a pattern. Here's a different perspective. Imagine Earth as a computer, civilizations as software, and extinction events as reboots. Now imagine that sometimes a bit of data survives the reset. A file, a circuit, a function call left behind in the code. That's what these artifacts may be. Residual memory, a remnant of version 1.0. If a lost civilization had reached even our current level of technology and fell 100,000 years ago, almost nothing would remain. Skyscrapers would be dust. Satellites would burn. Plastics might degrade. Digital files, all gone. All we'd have are a few geological scars, some chemical isotopes, a handful of unexplainable anomalies, which is exactly what we found. So the question is, are we looking at geology or are we looking at memory? And here's the terrifying possibility. If we don't take these clues seriously, if we ignore what doesn't fit the model, we are doomed to repeat the cycle. We will build, we will rise, we will fall, and someday, our smartphones will be found inside fossilized sediment, mistaken for a rock, laughed off as coincident, forgotten. Again, what if Earth was designed not to preserve memory, but to erase it? Time leaves scars, or so we like to believe. But what if it doesn't? What if time on a planetary scale doesn't just pass? It cleanses, wipes the slate, like a hard drive defragmenting itself. We imagine history as a layer cake, sediment stacked upon sediment, civilizations buried like pages in an ancient book. But Earth isn't a passive archive, it's a living engine, a churning, subducting, eroding volcanic beast, and it has amnesia. Let's start with a truth that makes archaeologists sweat. Very little survives the deep past. Most of human civilization, even the last 10,000 years, is known from a razor-thin slice of remains. We think we know history, but really, we're guessing from crumbs. Wood decays, clay crumbles, stone wears, metal rusts, cities sink, mountains rise. Now extend the timeline. Not 10,000 years, not 100,000, but millions. Do you think a city like New York would survive? 100,000 years from now, all that would remain of Manhattan could fit in your backpack. Maybe a few twisted rebar fragments, a faint chemical signature, a curious hole in a rock. That's what we would leave behind. Now ask yourself, what did they leave behind? And did the Earth consume it? Enter the concept of subduction zone. These are the Earth's recycling centers. Tectonic plates dive beneath one another, pulling the ocean floor and everything on it back into the mantle. Over millions of years, entire continents disappear. Not metaphorically, literally. Vanished, melted, their stories erased molecule by molecule. So if a civilization lived on a lost continent, if they built cities, power grids, art, knowledge, and that land slipped beneath the ocean, there'd be nothing left, not a single trace. Erosion is no kinder. Wind scours mountains to dust. Rain dissolves temples. Rivers eat stone like termites. Given time, nature devours everything. Even the pyramids will someday vanish. Given enough millennia, even Mount Everest will be a hill. So imagine the traces of a Stone Age, or a Steel Age, or a Silicon Age. From 50 million years ago, we wouldn't find cities. We'd find weird mineral deposits, maybe. And then there's glaciation ice ages that scrape the surface of Earth like a planetary reset button. The last major ice age buried 30% of Earth's surface under sheets of ice a mile thick. Anything beneath? Crushed, obliterated. The next one is coming, and it will do the same. So, if a civilization thrived during a warm interglacial period, like the one we're in now, they would be wiped clean the moment the ice returned. No monuments, no satellites, just silence. Even volcanoes help the forgetting. Lava doesn't just burn, it buries. It seals history in molten stone. Entire cities like Pompeii disappear in an instant. Now imagine that on a global scale. A chain reaction of volcanic winters, super eruptions, ash clouds blanketing the sky. The Earth wouldn't just forget you, it would burn the diary. This is why geologists and archaeologists rarely look for civilizations older than 10,000 years. Not because it's impossible, but because the evidence would have to fight against the Earth itself to survive. And the Earth is very good at forgetting. It absorbs memory and transforms it into rock. But here's the cosmic irony. While the Earth forgets, the cosmos remembers. Radiation from our cities bounces into space. Signals drift. Our atmosphere changes. If someone was watching us from afar, they might detect us long after we're gone. But here on the planet where we were born, the very dirt we walked on will forget our names. Because Earth is not a museum, it's a recycling system. Now, let's go deeper. The oldest seafloor on Earth is only about 200 million years old. Everything older? Gone. Subducted. Meanwhile, the universe is 13.8 billion years old. So Earth has potentially gone through many cycles, not just of life, but of civilization. And each time the surface resets, the clock starts over, like a cosmic etch-a-sketch. Imagine this scenario. A species rises. It builds. It thrives. It conquers the atom, the genome, the stars. And then, extinction. Not with a bang, but a slow fade. Environmental collapse. Solar flare. Biological mutation. Or simply, time. Their monuments are worn down. Their satellites fall. Their memory swallowed. Millions of years pass, and then we arrive, thinking we are the first. Here's the horror. We might not be the first. We might not even be the fifth. We might just be the latest chapter in a book that keeps getting erased. And every time, the story gets harder to read, until only whispers remain. But there's hope in that too, because it means the Earth is not just a graveyard. It's a womb, a cradle that keeps trying, resetting, offering new chances. And maybe, just maybe, that's by design. Maybe intelligence is not a singular event. Maybe it's a cycle. And the true history of Earth isn't a timeline, it's a loop. So next time you walk along a mountain ridge, or touch an ancient stone, or stare at the stars and wonder if we're alone, remember, you might be walking on the bones of the forgotten. You might be standing on a city that no longer has a name. You might be the result of a dream, long buried in the mantle of time, and somewhere beneath your feet, the Earth is already beginning to forget you. Asterisk. When history fades, it becomes legend, and when legends grow old, they become myth. But what if myth is just memory, wearing a mask? Asterisk. Long before telescopes, particle accelerators, or GPS, we had stories, not data, not measurements, but narratives, tales passed from fire pit to fire pit, carved into temple walls, chanted by elders who claimed their knowledge came from the stars. And we, in the modern age, dismiss them. We call them fairy tales, primitive, superstitious. But myths do not lie. They transform. They encode truths in symbols. They hide history behind gods and monsters. They remember what time wants us to forget. Because when a civilization dies, it does not scream, it sings. Let's begin with the oldest story known to humankind, the Great Flood. From Sumeria to China, from the Hopi to the Yoruba, from the Maya to the Bible, cultures oceans apart tell the same tale. A time when gods warned of destruction, a flood that swallowed the world, a chosen few who survived in an ark, a cave, a mountain. How did this myth reach every corner of the globe? Coincidence? Or is it a global trauma, buried beneath geology and time, but remembered by our collective psyche? Perhaps there was a flood. Not just water, but fire, ice, impact. A catastrophe so vast it scarred the human soul, and myth became the only way to carry the message forward. Next, the sky beings. Ancient cultures describe luminous beings descending from the heavens. Not metaphorically, literally. The Dogon people of Mali describes Sirius B, a white dwarf invisible to the naked eye in detail, long before telescopes existed. The Hopi speak of flying shields that roared like thunder. The Vedas describe Vimanas, flying palaces powered by Mercury. The ancient Sumerians depict winged beings they called the Anunnaki, who descended from the heavens to shape mankind. Are these divine allegories, or distorted memory of technological visitors, not from another planet, but from a forgotten epoch on our own, an age where skyships ruled and gods wore armor? And then there's forbidden knowledge. Almost every mythology warns of a time when humans had power they weren't ready for. In Greek myth, Prometheus steals fire from the gods and is punished. In the Bible, Eve eats from the tree of knowledge. In Mesopotamian lore, Enki gives humans language and wisdom against divine orders. Why is knowledge always the crime? Unless the knowledge was real, a memory of technology, language, energy, flight, things lost after the fall, things we once possessed and misused. And the myths are cautionary tales, not against seeking power, but against forgetting where it came from. Even the concept of gods may be encoded memory. The gods were not always omniscient creators. Often, they were rulers, teachers, warriors, powerful, but flawed. They had names, homes, rivalries. They taught agriculture, astronomy, architecture. In other words, they acted like people, advanced people, alien people, or perhaps ancestral people from a lost civilization. When their world ended, they became deified. Their machines turned to magic. Their sciences became sorcery. Their history became mythology. And over millennia, their truth was carved into tablets and sung into legend. But the signal is still there, buried in metaphor, waiting to be decoded. Let's try. Take Atlantis. Plato describes it as a powerful civilization, highly advanced, morally corrupted, that sank into the sea in a single day and night. We treat it as allegory, but what if Plato wasn't inventing? What if he was remembering or recording a tale passed down through priesthoods, scrolls, and oral memory? Many believe Atlantis was a stand-in for a real lost civilization, and not just Atlantis. There are other names: Kumarikandam in Tamil lore, asterisk, Lemuria in Theosophy, asterisk, Hyperborea in Greek myth, Shambhala in Tibetan legend, each said to be ancient, powerful, and buried either beneath ice, water, or secrecy. Too many myths, too many overlaps, too many whispers that rhyme. So here's the idea. Maybe myths are not nonsense. Maybe they're survival protocols. The way a species tries to remember when it's on the verge of forgetting. A poem is easier to preserve than a blueprint. A symbol is harder to erase than a formula. A god's wrath is easier to teach than a geological report. We didn't encode the facts. We encoded the feeling, the fear, the awe, the memory of falling, and the warning to rise better next time. Myths became memory vaults, and we are the generation cracking them open. Modern science sees ancient stories as psychological relics. But what if we flip the lens? What if science is just myth with more data? Both try to explain the unknown. Both use symbols, whether equations or metaphors. Both are human attempts to touch the infinite. So instead of asking, is this myth true? Ask, what truth is this myth trying to protect? And suddenly, the world looks different. The Garden of Eden becomes a memory of bioengineering. The Tower of Babel becomes a metaphor for global communication. The fall becomes a tale of hubris, energy misuse, or a lost golden age. Every story becomes a code. And here's the most haunting idea of all. Maybe we are the myth. Maybe a future civilization 100,000 years from now will tell stories of a time when humans split atoms, built machines, talked to satellites, and forgot their soul. They'll tell stories of gods who wore suits and lived in towers, of beings who controlled fire, flew across the sky, and tapped into unseen forces. And someone in that future will whisper, "Do you think they were real?" And another will reply, "Number just stories." But what if we leave them a clue? What if we become the myth that breaks the cycle by remembering not just our data, but our wisdom, by carving meaning into the fabric of time, by becoming more than just a footnote in the Earth's forgetting? Because if myths are memory, then memory is power, and the oldest power we have is to remember what we were, imagine what we could be, and become what no myth has yet told. If we are not the first to rise, let us be the first to remember. Civilizations fall. It's a pattern older than pyramids, deeper than fossils, sharper than any sword. Not because they're weak, not because they're doomed, but because the universe is a storm and time is merciless. Stars steam, planets change, and entropy always wins the long game. But here's the truth we keep avoiding. What we build will not survive. Not in the form we think. Not the steel, not the silicon, not even the cities etched in granite. Time reduces all of it to dust. So what will remain? What whispers will we leave in the stone? The Silurian Hypothesis was never just a question about ancient species or lost empires. It was a mirror, a reflection of ourselves, cast into deep time. If we vanished tomorrow, would another species ever know we were here? Would they find our satellites drifting in silence? Would they discover our chemical footprints in the air, the oceans, the ice? Would they read our myths, our music, our fear? Or would they stand, as we do now, on a world full of anomalies, wondering if someone had come before? This is the echo we are becoming, the fossil of a question. And so we ask, what is the final message of a civilization? Is it etched into gold plates, sent aboard Voyager, tumbling forever into interstellar night? Is it locked inside data vaults under the Arctic, waiting for digital archaeologists that may never come? Is it in the ruins we romanticize? The pyramids? The megaliths? The concrete bones of our cities? Or is it something else entirely? Something non-physical? Something perceptual? A shift in how we see, how we live, how we treat the earth and each other. The final message is not what we leave behind, it's what we pass forward. Because what if the goal of civilization is not to last, but to transcend, not to become eternal, but to become understood, to build not permanence, but memory, not monuments, but meaning. The next civilization, whether it rises from Earth or lands from stars, may not speak our language, but they'll know our weather. They'll inherit our atmosphere, our isotopes, our carbon scars. They'll feel the radiation in their bones. They'll know we were here. And the question is, what kind of story will that knowledge tell? We think of ourselves as gods, as masters of time, as builders of tomorrow, but the cosmos doesn't care about our Wi-Fi or our skyscrapers. It measures us in resonance, in the patterns we imprint onto the deep fabric of the earth, not just physical patterns, but emotional ones, philosophical ones, mythic ones. And perhaps if we listen closely enough, we can begin to shape that pattern with purpose. Not survival, not conquest, but significance. Because here's the deepest truth. We are not separate from the earth. We are not visitors. We are the latest expression of its memory. We are what happens when atoms remember how to dream. And if Earth has carried civilizations before, has watched them rise and fall, burn and vanish, then we are standing on a sacred edge. Not the beginning, not the end, but a chance to break the cycle, to write our message not in stone, but in spirit. Not in the monuments we build, but in the questions we leave behind. So what shall we inscribe? Let it not be arrogance. Let it not be silence. Let it not be waste. Let it be wonder. Let it be humility. Let it be the courage to imagine what came before and what might come next. Because if we truly are not the first, let us be the first to prepare the path for the next. Let us become the keepers of memory, so that one day, in some distant epoch, when the stars shift again and new eyes open beneath new skies, they won't just find dust. They'll find a story, a signal, a message that says, we were here, we wondered, we tried, we loved, and we dreamed not just for ourselves, but for you. So now, dear traveler, you've seen the echoes. You've walked the ruins of forgotten time. You've touched the myths, the isotope, the fossils of silence. You've asked the unaskable, what if we're not the first? And you've heard the answer. It's not yes. It's not no. It's this. Remember us. And if you can, become more than we ever were. This is the final message. And now, it is yours. If we are data in the dust, how do we write a story the future can read? Most civilizations vanish, not with apocalypse, but with erosion. Wind, rain, tectonics, the grinding machinery of a living planet consumes everything. Time is not just patient, it's hungry. Given enough time, it will eat everything we are. And yet, a strange thought lingers. What if we didn't resist it? What if we worked with it? What if we designed our legacy not to fight decay, but to speak through it? Imagine this. A vault, not of stone or steel, but of meaning. Not a monument that screams, "We were powerful," but a message that whispers, "Here's what mattered." Not just what we knew, but what we felt, what we learned, what we feared, what we loved enough to pass forward. The idea isn't new. The golden record aboard Voyager, the Doomsday Vault in Svalbard, the long now clock buried in a mountain to tick for 10,000 years. But what if we went further? What if we designed a planetary time capsule, not for ourselves, but for the next Earth-born intelligence? Even if it rises 100 million years from now, how do you write for a reader who doesn't speak your language, who may not even be human, who may not evolve eyes or ears, or even minds we can comprehend? You don't write to them, you resonate with them, through math, through isotopes, through geometry, through rhythm and beauty and asymmetry, through patterns that survive decay. You bury messages in the deepest rocks, the most stable layers of Earth's crust. You write with decay-resistant metals, synthetic DNA, layered ceramics, geological anomalies. You sculpt canyons, position monoliths, shape electromagnetic harmonics. You hide knowledge in the architecture of the planet itself. The Earth becomes your book, the wind, your editor. And here's the radical idea. Maybe this has already been done. Maybe we're standing on the last civilization's archive, but we've been looking in the wrong places. Not for ruins, but for intentional anomalies. Signals shaped into the crust, ratios baked into fossil layers, isotopic spikes that say, someone knew this was coming, geometries too precise to be chance. The archive of the past may be beneath our feet, so the archive of the future must be beneath theirs. We must become architects of durable truth, designers of temporal empathy, not just to teach, but to welcome the next voice to the choir of memory. And what should we include? Not just facts, not just warnings, but a full record of the human condition, our sciences, what we learned about atoms, stars, life, time, our failures, what poisoned us, blinded us, collapsed us, our stories, what gave us courage, what made us weep, what woke us up, our art, the irrational magic that made life worth the pain, our silence, the truths we never fully understood but felt deeply. Let it be messy, let it be beautiful, let it be flawed, but honest, because the next civilization won't need perfection. They'll need reminders that they're not alone, that someone, once, tried to break the cycle. And this is where science meets soul. Legacy is no longer about glory. It's about coherence across time. We are not trying to impress the stars. We are trying to speak to the next light that wakes up beneath them. Not aliens, not gods, but descendants of the same Earth. Whether reptilian, AI, or something unimaginable, they'll ask, who came before us? Did they know? Did they care? And if we're brave, if we're wise, our archive will answer, yes, we knew, we fell, we learned, and we cared enough to leave this message for you. Legacy is not a statue. It's not a name on a tower. It's not a date in a book. Legacy is a signal that survives entropy, a message that holds its shape across the chaos. Legacy is the story that outlives the storyteller, and we, standing on the bones of forgotten epochs, we have a choice. to become noise, or to become memory. So let's leave something behind, not out of fear, not out of ego, but out of a sacred responsibility to the future, to the past, to the next version of Earth's dreaming. Let's build the archive beneath their feet, so when they finally begin to wonder if they are alone, they'll know they are not, because once, long ago, we looked to the stars and asked the same question.